Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and more specifically to the MSPGeekCon playlist, the expansion pack from MSPGeekCon 23. First of all, I gotta say, we have the new MSPGeekCon is in the works. It is being planned. We're currently in negotiations with the hotel. We've got some potential dates selected, potential location. Everything's still up in the air as we work it through. And we are hoping to put together a level of content that is basically on par or exceeds the level of content we were able to provide in MSPGeekCon 23. So just a little bit teaser over there. We've got a good content committee. Myself and a few others are going to be coming together to actually plan out what it is we can do. We've got a little bit of a schedule change up, but I'm not going to spill any more secrets because I know Kyle and the others are going to come after me for saying things I shouldn't yet. Moving on, this video, this playlist, the video is a part of, is supposed to be a recap of the MSPGeekCon 23. There are 6 total sessions. I've only done 3 videos. Let me rephrase that. There are 6 total core sessions, and I'm supposed to be doing a video for each core session. I've only done 3 of them, and so this will be the 4th. I'm a little bit behind. I kept saying on the previous video, look, they're going to be coming out soon. I'm going to be doing it quickly. That's on my mind. Unfortunately, life gets in the way, and so we set goals. We don't always make them, but we always strive for them, and that's how we move forward. In this case, this video is going to be about Aaron Chernin got up on stage on day 2 and talked about the automation mindset. In the automation mindset, he talked about how one of the things that we need to do is, first of all, we want to automate. Obviously, everyone's all like, what does that mean? We want to automate. Everyone's all like, oh, automation these days, because they're trying to, like, we need to get improved efficiency. We want to cut down on the amount of people we need for certain things, maybe move them into different areas and help train them. We don't want to spend time doing the tier 1 administrative stuff. We want to take our tier 1 guys, train them up and put them into other areas. But what does automation actually mean? So one of the things Aaron talked about is, like, when you start talking about or start thinking about automation, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, like, we want to do everything. You ever walk into a candy store, if you like candy, or take a kid into a candy store and say, hey, you can have whatever you want, but just one of them, right? I'm not saying you can only have one automation. What I am saying is that there's only 24 hours in a day. You're not working 24 hours straight. So given the limited amount of time that you have, you need to cut down and actually determine, you have to pick the one you want to work on. And the bigger you make it, the longer it's going to take. So one of the things Aaron always talks about when he's dealing with Roost in the context of Roost, and he mentioned in the conference, was that what you want to do is you pick a process and you start with automating 20% of it. And then you continue automating over time until eventually it's 40% or 60% or 80%. The other thing he talked about is that in order for you to automate something, you have to have a process already. That's the very first part. You can't automate something that doesn't exist. Yeah, sure, we do things, we create new users. What is your process? We don't know, we just go make it. If everyone's doing the process differently, how are you going to automate it? Part of automation allows for standardization, but really it's the process part that makes the standard. Everyone has to follow the standard. Now, not everyone may follow the standard. They may not all follow directions, but that standard, that process has to exist. And then we take that automation and we focus it around that process. And that is exactly how we then enforce that standard. So we're just setting the stage here, right? Process automation is essentially taking a process that exists and automating it. The other part is you understand, like, your process consists of 100 steps. Now, you can't do all 100 in automation in one shot because that's going to take a really long time to implement. And in fact, you're going to get your money's worth in terms of how much effort and efficiency and labor hours. You're going to get that back once you hit that first 40% or first 50%. And the rest are all stupid little things that don't take up as much time. So what you really want to do is you want to follow, maybe it's the 80-20 rule. You want to take as much as you can, but in the first iteration, don't overdo it. And you want to identify how much needs to be automated for you to make back that money. And then how long is it going to take to automate that? Because that's part of the equation when it comes to is it worth automating? The answer is, well, that depends. Are you going to be spending less time on building the automation than you are running through this process? And of course, that needs a time period. How many times do you run that process? Once a month, once a year, once a week, every day? Right? The more often you run the process, the higher the savings you're going to get. And so the thinking goes as follows: like if it takes you, if you're gonna save more money in a year period by spending the time on automation, that means you should be spending X amount of time in that 1 year period so that you don't go over that budget. And then year 2, you can come back and think about, okay, what's the next step that we need to automate? And you do the same thing again. In fact, you may even end up with a bunch of different processes that are all 50% automated or 60% automated or even 10% automated, depending on how complex it gets, on the benefits that you get back. So we got off on a tangent. The bottom line is, this is the automation mindset was what the conference session was about. This is one of the things Aaron talked about. And the key thing that he mentioned was, when you're dealing with automation, you actually want to think abstract. Because, and again, this may not come to you naturally. It may not be the first thing you start thinking of. It's very hard to plan out. It may come through in iterations. But when you're dealing with a script, or if you're building a workflow in Roost or in Power Automate or anything like that, and you have to deal with data, in order to drive your process, you need data of some kind. And if you're not abstracting that data to make that process repeatable, then you're making that process, that automation, essentially a one-time use thing. Let's give you an example. I use Halo PSA personally. The MSP at IntelliComp uses Halo PSA. My company, Rising Tide, uses Halo PSA. I'm a Halo PSA consultant. And so for the most part, I'll be talking about Halo PSA tickets. So let's say I have an automation that makes a ticket every time something happens. Now, let's say that ticket is new user creation. So I have a form that my clients have. My clients fill out a form. We need a new user set up. The form asks things like, what's your user's name? What's the user's last name? So on and so forth. All the information about the user. And then the form collects that information and goes and makes a ticket inside of my system. Now, in addition to making the ticket, let's just say it creates a new user, it creates a mailbox, it resets the password, let's say it configures 2FA, registers the phone, or at least marks it as a phone usable, so the user has to do the first sign-on or something like that. Let's say we add the licensing, and we do all these things as part of automation, which means that the ticket can automatically be closed. And so what I do with my automation workflow is I send the form, or the user has the form already, HR has the form they can fill out at will. The form creates a ticket. The form workflow, which created that ticket, then goes and performs all the work necessary for getting that user onboarded. And then it goes and enters time into that ticket and closes it out. All right. Let's say I have that workflow that's working. Now, the customer comes to me and says, hey, by the way, we're getting a lot of turnaround. We got a lot of new users, but we also got a lot of users who are leaving. And we kind of want the same kind of form. Can you give us another form for disabling the user that does the exact reverse, right? So up until now, they've been emailing in the disablements, and they've been sending a form in for the new users. Now they want to say, we want a form to disable users just like we have one to create users. No problem. Here's a new form. If my workflow for creating the users, here's the point, by the way, pay attention now because I was rambling before. If my workflow creates a ticket, and that ticket is hard-coded to state new user created request, and that ticket has hard-coded to state the following user is being requested to set up, and it's hard-coded to do all these things, then I can't just go copy that new ticket code and put it into my offboarding user form workflow. That won't work because I have to go change all the hard-coded values. And let's say I do that. Let's say I copy that code and I put it into the offboarding one, and then I go modify all the references to new user, and change it to the user leaving, and so on and so forth. I now have 2 copies of the same code where the only difference is the actual body and text of the subject and ticket, which makes no sense. If something breaks, if Halo changes something in their API, now I got to go modify the code, not in one place, but in 2. It doesn't make any sense. And so we can take that concept and apply it to anything else. We can say, you know what, hey, API keys. We're going to hard code our API keys. It's more secure that way. Yeah, all right. Don't ever do that. We're going to hard code our API keys and our URLs. It's more secure that way. No one's ever going to find it. And that's what's going to happen. Anytime you want to reference and do something against an API, you're going to have to put in the API keys and the URL. Well, let's say you've expanded. Now you have more than one Halo PSA for some reason. Or let's say your API keys got rotated. Now you got to run around and change them all. It doesn't make any sense. The point of abstraction is to use variables or use generic functions or sub workflows, depending on where you are. If it's Roost, it's a sub workflow, to do that same action without hard coding anything. And so you use parameters instead. The parameters will ask you for the information that you want. What's a parameter? What's your API key? That's a parameter. And then you pass the API key in line. Where is it coming from? It's coming from a variable stored in a secure config map or something like that, some encrypted form that you're just referencing, secrets dot whatever, right? Well, in that case, you don't have to change it in every area where you're referencing it, because every place it's going to reference it is going to reference the same variable. So you just go change it in one place. If you have a sub workflow or a function, it's doing that to create a ticket, and you want to expand it to not just put in a note and a summary. You want to do some fancy HTML formatting in the note, which you can do with Halo. Yes, that was a dig, Tim, if you're watching. I'm sorry. You can do fancy HTML formatting in the ticket, and you want to readjust the branding and how it all looks and so on and so forth. Now, instead of going to two different places, you go to your generic function and just modify it right there. And again, you pass in, okay, when you're calling this function from the new user, you're passing in the contents of the ticket, you're passing in the summary as parameters. You've now abstracted this function, and you've now made it easier to automate, and you're making your next automation even easier. You don't have to go find and dig through and readjust that code to make it work for your next automation you're going to do. You just have to reference that sub function and then fill in the parameters that are already asking for, because you've created them as parameters. And so this is the idea of the automation mindset that we want to really dig into. We want to talk about how, or Aaron did talk about how, using parameters and abstraction can make repeatable code significantly easier for you to automate. Can make repeatable code, which then makes it significantly easier for you to automate. That came out right. So that was the concept of his session at MSPGeekon. And I want to, again, as always, the whole point of these sessions the whole point of these videos are to provide additional lines or layers of thinking, some additional thoughts, expand on it, and see where we get. Now I got to think about what it is I wanted to say about this. The theme about MSPGeekon has always been about the technician, taking the technician level from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. If you're already tier 1, you're going to go to tier 2. You're going to go to tier 2. You're going to go be tier 3. That has been the theme of the conference. Everything that we've been focusing on has always been about how do you improve troubleshooting, how do you improve your technician, how do you improve wellness of your personal life and growth, and so on and so forth. And so we can take the idea of abstraction and we can apply it to other areas. Let's say, for example, this is kind of a dumb example, but bear with me. It's easy to copy that to other places. But let's say, for example, we're in the kitchen and we want to put together a snack. We're making a sandwich of some kind, right? And so you can follow a checklist of sorts, a process to make the sandwich. Number 1, get the bread. Number 2, I don't know, let's say a PBJ sandwich. We're gonna get the peanut butter, we're gonna get the jelly, we're gonna get the knife, we're gonna get 2 knives and a fork. If you know how to really make a peanut butter jelly sandwich without getting too messy, it's 2 knives and a fork almost every time. Ask me in the comments and I'll be happy to explain. Now you're running around the kitchen, and so let's assume that you're starting from the center of the kitchen, and you look at your list and go, oh, I need the bread. Get the bread, come back. There we go, got the bread. What's next? Oh, need the peanut butter. Go get the peanut butter, come back. What do I need now? Jelly. Oh, let's go get the jelly, come back, and so on and so forth. And now you're completing this process, which is basically what we do anytime we do troubleshooting. We complete a process. We should be completing a process in our minds about what may be wrong and gathering that data and figuring things out, right? Now, what happens if I tell you, hey, the bread and peanut butter are together, you've got plates, forks, and knives together, and you're going to want to drink, right? And so the jelly and the orange juice or whatever you're drinking, milk, is going to be together as well. Well, now that you've given that context, would you potentially go and grab everything that you need at the same time? Well, I'm here already. Let's also grab the bread at the same time as the peanut butter at the same time as the bread. So I don't have to go back and do it twice, right? This is where it starts coming in. This is similar to building functions and abstraction and parameters. It's a little hard to connect the two, but if you abstract for a moment, you can kind of see how it's semi-related. It's kind of the same thinking model. Let's go one step further. And we say, well, you know what? Actually, the layout of the room is one big circle. Essentially, it's really a square. But if you were to go here, you're right next to. If you were to go to get the bread and peanut butter, you're right next to the fork and knives and the plates. And so you can just take one step further, get those, and then go to the fridge, which is right across, get the jelly and the drink, and then come back to the center and make your sandwich. Now you've taken something that's completely out of order. Before, you need the bread, you need the peanut butter, you need the jelly, you need the fork, knives, you need the plates, and then you need the drink, right? That's the order and how it would make sense to build the sandwich. But in this case, I'm saying, well, wait a second. We don't need to go in order of building the sandwich of the materials that we need. What we should do instead is go in order of what's most efficient. So I'm already at the peanut butter and bread. That's fine. That's an order. I'll grab those two. Now I'm right next to the plates, forks, and knives. It doesn't make any sense to go across the room to grab the jelly and then go back across the room where I was already there. So you start restructuring in your mind. Now, I don't know anybody who goes to their kitchen thinking about this the entire time. Like, oh, I'm in the kitchen. I want to get some food. Let me think about the optimal way to move around my kitchen to save time and steps. That doesn't really happen, right? You go back to the theory about how you want to make sure when you're automating something, you're doing it in a way that you're making back, right? The amount of time it takes to automate is not more than the amount of time you're saving. You want it to be less. But the idea is the same. The example works. That's the reason why I picked it. In terms of troubleshooting, another example that I look at all the time, I see all the time, is a user calls in and says, "Hey, I have no internet, and I'm a technician. I'm a tier 2 technician at my desk. Let's say I'm a tier 1 technician at my desk. Actually, I'm taking phone calls. I get a call, no internet at my computer. What's the first question I'm going to ask? Well, does anyone else have a problem? Nope. Everyone else is fine. It's just me. Okay. Well, do you mind checking the cable to your computer to see if there's a light on?" That's the first thing most people are going to ask. Now, granted, this may have changed over the years, but the reason why it changed is not because they started thinking more efficiently. It's just because the training has allowed them to know that, hey, there's another way to get that same answer. And so they're still learning rote memory, and they're still following a process. It hasn't actually improved their critical thinking at all. At least as far as the tier 1 side would work. So we'll take the old example of, is your cable connected? Do you have a light? Well, I don't know. I got to call into my floor. I got to hold on 1 second, put my phone down, call into the desk. Like, I just breathed some dust bunnies in and I'm dying, right? It's a whole process to get the guy on the floor to figure out whether or not there's a light connected to the computer. And they're gonna, okay, oh, all right, I'm alive. All right, that was rough. Yeah, there's a light. Now what? Well, now what? Nothing. We just expended a lot of time and effort to figure out whether there's a light on the computer where the network cable goes into. We know that there is now. We know the cable is connected to the wall. We know it's connected to something, but it still hasn't really moved us far enough along to make that worth it, right? So going back to the automation mindset, this is what we want to drill into the tier 2, tier 3 things. As a tier 2 technician, you know what I was doing when I got a call about a user who had no internet at their desk? Would you be comfortable with me walking you through some steps on the computer? Oh, I have to crawl on them. Nope, no crawling under the desk. Just follow along and let me know if it gets too complicated. I'm going to try to make it really easy for you. Click on the start button. Back then in the days, there was a run command. There was a run button on the start button. On the start menu, go ahead and click run for me. Is Windows XP. Type in Charlie Mike Delta or Charlie Mike David or whatever it is you use to indicate CMD. And then when that pops up in the black box, type in ipconfig and press enter. That is it. Those are the steps I had them take. It took less than a minute almost every time, unless they were not an English native speaker. And what I would get from the information from command prompt by running ipconfig is, hey, am I seeing media state disconnected? Hey, guess what? I don't need to know if there's a cable with a light connected to it, because command prompt will tell me that when I run ipconfig by stating media state disconnected. What's the next step? Let's say that you hadn't done that and the cable was connected and you had a light. What do you need to know now? Well, I need to know your IP address, or I need to figure out if DHCP is working, or I need to figure out if I can ping something. What am I going to ping? I don't know. I need to figure that out. Well, anything that you would have taken for the most part would have resulted in an ipconfig step. That's more or less where things would go. Some people go to NSLOOKUP first, or they just do a ping straight to whatever they assume the IP address is. You know, depending on the training of the tier 1 and how competent they were and how much they paid attention, they would perform different things. But generally, they would get to the point where they'd have to run ipconfig. I'm skipping that and just going straight to it. Hey, let's get the guy comfortable with running commands on the computer and get me an ipconfig. If it's a DHCP problem, I'm going to see a 169 address. If I don't see a 169 address and I don't see media state disconnected, I have in front of me my IP address that I need. I wrote it down when the guy read it off to me, and I have in front of me the default gateway that I need to know what to ping in order to make sure things are working. And so using critical thinking and the automation mindset of being able to turn repeatable processes into something, being able to turn steps into a repeatable process, into an abstracted repeatable process, will allow you to improve your troubleshooting, will allow you to improve your life planning when it's something worth it, not planning your meal in the kitchen, something different. And that'll actually take you to the next level, right? One of the things that I talked about in the previous videos within this playlist was the different levels of a tier. What are the different tier levels of a technician? This is something that is not standardized across the board. It's something that not everybody agrees with, and it's something that I'm hoping to eventually standardize through MSP Geek, through Rising Tide, through everybody I talk to, through these videos. If you're listening and you want to adopt it, please tell me. I would love to hear your feedback. The tier 1 technician is the guy who can fix things based off of what they know, right? They've learned something and they can apply it. So they have concepts in mind. Oh, create a new user, I know how to do that. Oh, network down. These are the steps we need to take to see what's going on. When they run into a problem that they don't know, that they haven't been trained on, they throw up their hands. Escalation, help, help. They press that call button on the airplane to bring somebody over, because they can't figure it out. They haven't been trained to. They don't even think that they can. They're playing the role of a tier 1 technician, and that's the end of their role, is apply the things that I've learned. When I can't, I run out of ideas, move on to the next guy and go to my next ticket. A tier 2 technician is going to be someone who will figure it out. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter what, they will figure it out. That is what makes you a tier 2 technician. You apply critical thinking, guess and check, right? You come up, it doesn't have to be the same process that you do for troubleshooting that everyone else will follow for that situation. It has to be a process. Guess and check is just as good a process as anything else. Well, maybe it's that. Boom. Nope, it's not. Maybe it's that. Nope, it's not. Right? The level of tier 2 technician that you are will depend based off of how good your process has become. The level of experience that you have will tell you which way to go. You know, I talked about in the critical thinking video, I talked about the execution chain for running a file from a program from a shortcut. That execution chain exists everywhere. Hey, when you open a document, there is an execution chain for how the document opens. It's not a shortcut, it doesn't go to the file path, but there is an execution chain that the computer completes. There's a chain of steps the computer will complete in order to get that file to open. When you're escalating something, when you're specifically, let me rephrase that. When you're elevating software as an admin, there is an execution chain that occurs to have that elevation occur. And so everything that occurs in IT, when you start up a computer, right? One of my favorite scenarios to test critical thinking in an interview is, hey, you turn the computer on, it's Windows 7, and the Dell or whatever logo BIOS screen goes away, and now you're stuck at a black screen with a flashing cursor on the top left corner. What is the problem? How do you troubleshoot? One of my favorite questions to ask in interviews. And I'll tell you the answer right now. I won't make you suffer over it. But the answer is essentially a bad hard drive. And the reason I pick it is because there are so many things that you can do to troubleshoot that. And the way you troubleshoot it will tell me kind of how you think. The answer is bad hard drive. That's the scenario. It happened several times. It's not common. Most of the time, bad hard drives occur. Some other kind of situation happens. But there are problems. There are situations where if you have a bad hard drive connected to it, Windows will try to seek the hard drive or initialize the hard drive at the time of startup. And so if you have a bad hard drive, even if it's not the Windows OS hard drive, even if you have a bad hard drive, Windows can hang. Another situation is the Windows 7 splash screen comes up and it just freezes, stops circling. And now you're just stuck. And you've waited 2-3 hours and it's there. Every time you reboot, same thing happens, right? That can happen too because of a bad hard drive. And so I like using those scenarios for troubleshooting because the idea of how you figure it out that it's a bad hard drive will tell me where exactly and how exactly your thinking is coming from. What was the point of that? The point of that is if I were to troubleshoot something like that, right, I would be looking for what happens when you have a bad hard drive. Back in the day, we had a bad hard drive, it would actually tell you no boot disk found, right? Or it would tell you bad hard drive, or it would give you some kind of error message saying, hey, we tried and it failed, right? The point I'm making here is that when you do your troubleshooting steps, you want to look for both error messages that are happening as well as successes that are happening. But you don't want to look at the error messages because you want them to not happen. You actually want them to happen to make sure the system is behaving the way it should. Okay? And so if you understood the execution chain of how the computer boots, you turn on the machine back in the day. Again, this is all outdated stuff. Back in the day, the computer would turn on, BIOS would load, BIOS would do a handoff to the MBR on the hard drive. The hard drive would then boot up Windows because the MBR would tell it which partition Windows was on, and then the Windows splash screen would come up. When you're dealing with a situation that's a black screen and a flashing underscore, you don't know where you're at. Has BIOS handed that off to the hard drive or not? Has the hard drive picked it up and handed it off to the specific partition where Windows is located? We don't know. And so the error messages that we're looking for will tell us where the problem is. This could be a bad BIOS. The flash could be corrupt. Something could have happened to the system board, or it could be a bad hard drive. How do you tell? You have no other hard drives with you. You've got no USB keys. You literally just got there. Someone yanked you to your desk, from your desk, or on the way to your desk, or whatever the situation is. And the only tool you have in front of you is your hands. How do you tell what's going on? Well, I yank the hard drive out and see what happens. Does the computer successfully get to a point where it says no hard drive found? Does it try to boot and says no boot disk detected? Press any key to continue. Because if it does, that means we've confirmed BIOS is good and there's something wrong with your hard drive. And so with one step, I can find that out based off the situation. Anyways, I hope this was helpful to you. I feel like I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. The point of this was that with the abstraction of concepts and the automation mindset, you can actually simplify a lot of your processes and make them go faster and more efficient. There are situations where you can get into that you end up messing yourself up. Before we go, one quick thing. Bad memory. Okay, again, we're talking about old scenarios just to make the point. But if you have bad memory on a desktop, you've got 4 sticks of memory, you don't know which one is bad, potentially the memory slot is bad. The process to troubleshoot each memory stick is to go one by one. Let's put one stick in and see whether or not the issue occurs until you find one that's bad. Now, you also have to test each slot because you don't know if it's a slot or if it's memory or what's going on. So some people would be like, oh, well, I got 4 sticks. I can test 2 at a time. So I'm going to test these 2. And then if it works, I'm going to test those 2. And then I'll test the other 2. And then it's too complicated, right? You're going to end up working out. I mean, there are situations where it could work. If you happen by happenstance fall into the perfect by accident combination, you could actually solve it faster, right? That would be like walking around with your eyes closed and accidentally finding the exit. But more often than not, you'll end up spending the same amount of time with additional complexity for no reason. And so you have to be aware of that. When you try going around simplifying processes, again, same idea, the automation mindset, the amount of time you're investing to automate, is it worth the amount you're saving from that automation? Anyways, final wrap up for real. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know in the comments. This was video number 4. I've got 2 more videos left, and then this playlist is done. And it is on my mind, and hopefully it's coming soon. I said it last time. I'm not going to say it this time because I don't know when it's actually coming, but I will try my best to get it out there as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.